As Jesus begins his ministry, he starts baptizing people, something John the Baptist had already been doing. This causes John's disciples to ask about Jesus' success. I am reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 3, beginning with verse 22. Jesus and his disciples went into Judea, where Jesus spent some time with them and was baptizing. John was baptizing at Enon, near Salem, because there was a lot of water there, and people were coming to him and being baptized. John hadn't yet been thrown into prison. A debate started between John's disciples and a certain Jew about cleansing rituals. They came to John and said, "Rabbi, look, the man who is with you across the Jordan, the one about whom you testify, is baptizing, and everyone is flocking to him." John replied, "No one can receive anything unless it is given from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said that I'm not the Christ, but that I'm the one sent before him. The groom is the one who is getting married. The friend of the groom stands close by, and when he hears him, is overjoyed at the groom's voice. Therefore, my job is now complete. His must increase, and I must decrease." May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and doing.
Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. It is a prayer of the heart for human need. Lord, have mercy. It's asking God for what I need when I'm not sure what I need. It's the prayer that I turn to when I'm not sure that I have the words to be able to pray. It's leaning into the words of Paul from Romans chapter 8, verse 26. The Spirit comes to help our weakness. We don't know what we should pray, but the Spirit himself pleads our case with unexpressed groans. As someone who spends much of his week formulating the right words to say, I sat down on Friday afternoon to begin writing this message, reflecting on what had happened thus far in the week, and I had no words. No words. Lord, have mercy. I mean, this is not what I pictured. It's not what any of us pictured. And think back to the end of February. Doesn't the end of February seem like such a long, long time ago? At the end of February, we were hearing about a coronavirus in China, and somehow it seemed to have spread to Italy, and though there were a couple of cases identified in the United States, we all went about doing our lives our everyday lives as if everything was normal. And yet, 3 months later, 1,000 Minnesotans are dead, more than 100,000 people across the United States, and 3 months from now, we have no idea where we will be. I mean, this is not what we pictured. And as Tammy reminded us, behind every number there is a person who was loved, and family and friends who are grieving the person who was loved. So much hurt, so much pain. Lord, have mercy. And then we have the events of the past week here in Minneapolis. The realization that other problems have not disappeared during this pandemic. On Monday night, a black man is killed at the hands of white police officers. It is a story that the recurring story that happens over and over again in this country. And this time it ignites an anger and a rage of racial injustice that has been building for generations. And before we jump to conclusions, before we try to place blame anywhere, we best listen to the anger and to the rage, especially if we are not African American. And then listen to what we're feeling on the inside and why we are feeling what we are feeling. So much hurt, so much pain. Lord, have mercy. On Thursday morning, one of our staff members recommended the book, The Person You Mean to Be. It's written by psychologist and New York University professor Dolly Chu. The book is meant to help us look inside ourselves and to address some of the tough issues like racism, so that we can become the people that we were meant to be, the people that God needs us to be, and ultimately become a better world. And isn't that what we all want, especially now? So I immediately downloaded the book and I began reading it, but I got stuck in the preface when I came to this question. How can it be true that some of the time all of us act in ways that are not perfectly ethical, but amazingly every one of us believes him or herself to be a good person? Now let that sink in. I mean, haven't we all had thoughts or words or actions that were not the person, that did not reflect the person that we meant to be, the person that God needs us to be? I'll be honest now. I mean, deep inside, so angry that we want to smash something. Or so angry that we say something or we do something or we don't speak up or stand up or do something. Lord, have mercy. See, sometimes we do not and cannot see as we ought. In 1963, 80% of white Americans felt that racial minorities were treated equally. And this was at a time when in 16 states it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry. In 2016, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick began kneeling on one knee during the national anthem as his silent protest of a nation that oppresses black people and people of color. Now that's his experience. Are we listening? And a year later, when Sports Illustrated awarded him with the Muhammad Ali Legacy Award, he was attacked online with some of the worst language imaginable. Lord, have mercy. I mean, over the past few days, we've watched the events unfold in the streets of Minneapolis. Folks, Black Lives Matter. I mean, yes, all lives matter, but we don't live in that kind of world, at least not yet. And until every life experiences a life that matters. And every life is treated as someone who matters, then we must be prepared to stand up for those who are not treated equally and say, every life matters. Your life matters. See, we're all part of this collective humanity. Each one loved by a God who wants each one to be treated equally. Lord, have mercy. Now, before the events of this past week, I'd planned to focus in on the scripture that we found in the 3rd chapter of John's Gospel. And as I thought more about it this week, I think this scripture still works for us. See, John wants us to look deep inside, not look deep inside ourselves. See, John was known for baptizing people. And people thought he was so good that he must be the Messiah. Are you Jesus? Are you the one? Are you the one we've been waiting for hundreds of years? John was so relevant, so cutting edge. His influence so great that people wondered, are you the one we've been waiting for? And when Jesus arrives on the scene, here's what John the Baptist says about himself. In the midst of all the praise that he's been receiving, in the midst of all of the pats on the back, in the midst of all of the followers, in the midst of all of the people who want to be like John, who want to celebrate him, name their children after him, John refuses to accept that praise for himself, and instead he moves in the exact opposite direction when he says, he must increase, and I must decrease. Jesus must increase, and I must decrease. I mean, what if that were our mantra? Less of me and more of Jesus. I don't think that's where we live today. I don't think that's what's running through our veins. When you look at the moon, what do you see? You know, the moon does not produce any light. All the moon does is to position itself correctly so that it can receive the light. And when the moon receives the light, it says, I am going to send that light somewhere else. Now, folks, as followers of Jesus, we are not the sun. We are the moon. And when we receive the light, we are meant to be the full moon. And for us to be the full moon, we must allow the light of God's love to shine in every nook and cranny of our lives. Now look at the moon once again. You see the craters? The moon has been hit and battered over and over and over again. And somehow the craters enhance the beauty of the moon. I mean, if we have lived any length of time, we have our own craters. Things that we have done, decisions that we have made, choices that have left a dent, and usually our immediate response is to cover that up, hide that, put that away. But God says, don't hide it, I will use it. I mean, we want to become the perfect moon, and God says, I don't need you to be the perfect moon. I want to use you as you are. I mean, just let my light shine on the craters. So that my light can shine and be reflected through every corner of your life. I mean, that's the amazing grace. It's amazing because I don't know how God does that, but God has been doing that forever. You know, John Wesley said, there is no holiness without social holiness. We begin by allowing the light of God's love to shine deep within us so that we are changed, but that change can never be complete until we allow that light that is shown in us to be reflected into places of need. You know, we live in a broken world. I mean, this is not the world that God pictured. A world where people are hurt every single day, often intentionally and sometimes without hurtful intent, and yet it still happens. I mean, we know that acts of violence are not right. And yet there can be so much desperation and fear and injustice and this feeling of being left behind that it leads people to do the unthinkable. We are broken. And what we've seen happening in the streets of our beloved communities is an indication of our brokenness. It's like a scab has been ripped from a wound that has not healed and will never heal as long as we, both individually and collectively, do not let the light of God's love shine into every single corner, nook, and cranny of our lives. So that the light of God's love and justice can shine where it's needed in this world. And the way that we will know that we have become the full moon is when we see God waving a hand in our direction and we no longer think that God is waving to somebody else, but God is ready, God is willing, God is waiting for you and me. Lord, have mercy. On Wednesday night, I received an email from Jesus Paracasa. Jesus is the pastor of Iglesia Piedra Viva, our partner congregation in South Minneapolis. Jesus and his wife Colleen live just one block from the intersection of 38th and Chicago, where George Floyd was killed on Monday night. They serve 41 families that are located in neighborhoods that were on fire this past week. And he sent this email late on a Wednesday night because he had this emergency need and he did not know anywhere else to turn. A family, a mom, a dad, 2 children ages 6 and 12. All 4 of them have COVID-19. The dad had lost his job and could not get unemployment, will not receive a federal stimulus check. And Jesus said that they had been able to provide the utilities and they'd been able to supply the family with food, but the rent was due. And that rent was $1,200. And immediately I thought, well, that's the amount of the federal stimulus check. And so immediately I responded and I told Jesus that our answer is yes, that we would meet this need. And then I remembered that a family in our congregation had reached out to me saying that they wanted to give their stimulus check to somebody else. And so I contacted them early on Thursday morning, and they immediately said yes. And so I sat down to write this $1,200 check from our crisis fund. It's an account that you empower your pastors to utilize to respond to emergency needs. And as I'm writing this check for $1,200, I hear a voice that I recognize as the voice of Jesus, who says to me, if you are told to go 1 mile, then you go 2 miles instead. Give to those who have need and do not withhold from those who want to borrow from you. And so I wrote the check for $2,400, double what they had been asking. Not so I could get some pat on the back, not so that we as Messiah Church could get some pat on the back, but so we could reflect. So we could reflect the light of God's love. And others could see, not us, but what the power of God's love could do. You know, in recent days, like so many others in this country, I've turned to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke so eloquently about love, the power of love to heal. And in accepting his Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, he said this: I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Folks, we must believe that the light will prevail. You and I are not the light. But we are empowered to reflect the light. Now, this sermon this morning does not have an ending because I believe you are the ending. There can be no holiness without social holiness. I must decrease so that Jesus can increase. Be the moon. Be the moon so the light can shine. And with Dr. King, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. Lord, have mercy.